Good afternoon, everybody, all the people here in the room and people connected online. And welcome to the Veterinary Medicines Info Day, which will be held this afternoon and tomorrow morning. Before I kick off with giving you the information on the Info Day itself, I would like to make a few announcements. This week we had the first face-to-face meeting of the Cvmp, the Committee for Veterinary Medicinal Products, here at the agency, the first face-to-face meeting since 2 years, which means that the past 24 meetings were all in the virtual environment under, let's say, challenging conditions in a challenging time, and not only having to cope with COVID, but also having to deal with the implementation of preparation for the implementation of the new veterinary regulation. And that's why last year we organized 2 info days, so in 2021, and this is the first info day since the go live date of that implementation 3.5 months ago. However, I would like to reflect a bit on the Cvmp meeting that we had this year, and you will read it all in the press release that will come out later this week. Because it was the first face-to-face meeting since 2 years, but it was also the last meeting that we could benefit from the chair that has been chairing Cvmp for the past 6 years. David Murphy is in the room with us now. I can assure you that we gave him a goodbye yesterday evening. I hope he enjoyed it. And after a let's say a difficult voting process, because technology was working against us, I'm also pleased to announce that Cvmp has a new chair for the next 3-year mandate, and that is Johan Scheffele from the Medicines Evaluation Board here in the Netherlands. So he will be the new chair and take over that role from David, and we are convinced that he will do an excellent job in chairing the committee and leading the committee into the future. So that's the bit of the short feedback on the past days. It was good to see everyone here in the agency face to face, as it was also good last week for me to meet with the stakeholders in person during the HMA stakeholder meeting in Saint Malo, at least some of you. So since our last info day, as you all know, the Veterinary Medicinal Products Regulation is now applicable. 28th of January was the mythical day. And although we had to make changes to our processes and learn new ways of working, I'm happy that together we ensure that progressively the expected benefits of the regulation can be delivered and will be delivered. This info day we've organized to provide you with the latest regulatory and scientific updates, but we also make this platform available to listen to your first experiences after the go live date. So at this info day we will present you the latest news and updates which we feel are relevant for industry. Those contain regulatory updates. There's a presentation on the pharmacovigilance process, which is new, and the preview of the planned Gmp revision. I would like to state here that for the delivery of the new regulation, the collaboration of industry stakeholders has been paramount. Now that all the work done during the last year is being put to the test, we're in a new situation, and it probably makes for one of the most stressful periods for the whole process. Certainly for us, national competent authorities, but I think also for you as industry stakeholders. However, I am positive that by continuing to work together, we can ensure that the expected benefits of the regulation are being delivered. And we're looking into also ways of how can we measure that impact, and can we measure how it will deliver on the objectives that were set out at the start of the development of this regulation. And this meeting is again a virtual meeting. There are no restrictions in Europe anymore that would not allow us to have a face-to-face meeting. However, in the agency itself, we're currently running a pilot with resuming face-to-face meetings, and it had been decided here that we would not have face-to-face meetings with larger group industry stakeholders or for training purposes yet. The downside is that we cannot meet face-to-face and have the informal discussions that make the Info Day very valuable. But on the upside, close to 900 participants have registered in this event, and I don't know how many are connected right now, but I am sure that, as with previous events, we will attract quite a number of people that are interested in the work of the agency and in the work that has been done on the veterinary medicinal products regulation, and would like to hear from the Commission on where we are and how we will proceed. The program itself, as you can all see, is structured around 2 sessions. The first session will focus on regulatory policy, while the second session will cover scientific developments, but also include a more in-depth regulatory update. As said, you will hear the views of the agency, industry speakers, and the European Commission. And with that, we would like to create a full picture and have also feedback on experiences. And this will help us to improve for the coming time. I hope that today's program will stimulate a fruitful exchange, and I would like to wish you a successful Veterinary Medicines Info Day. And I would now like to give the floor to Barbara Freischem, the head of EMA's Veterinary Medicine Surveillance and Regulatory Support Department, who will chair the first session. So over to you, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Ivo. And I will actually hand over straight to the first speaker, who is Eva Zamora Escribano, the head of Animal Nutrition and Veterinary Medicines Unit at the European Commission in DG Santé. Eva graduated in veterinary medicines in Madrid and holds a PhD in swine vesicular disease. She currently, as I said, heads the unit of animal nutrition and veterinary medicines, but she previously worked in bilateral international regulations at DG Santé, where she was responsible for sanitary and phytosanitary issues for Latin America and the Caribbean countries, and she also worked intensively as the deputy head of unit for multilateral international regulations, and in particular Codex Alimentarius issues at DG Santé. So she's a well-rounded personality who really helped us in implementing the veterinary medicines regulation, and it's my pleasure to give her the floor now for her update on the implementation of the regulation from the Commission's perspective. Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to everyone. And again, many thanks to the agency for having invited me once again to this Info Day. So as it was said in the introductory remarks at our previous meeting last year, the Gmp regulation was not yet in place, and this is our first meeting where the Gmp is fully applicable. So I would also like to start by thanking you and congratulate you on your valuable input and the active involvement that you have had so far in this complex and long process, where we have already put in place so many legal acts that hopefully will allow us to implement and to fully develop this regulation. I would also like to take the opportunity before starting with the presentation to thank David Murphy for his excellent work as chair of the Cvmp. So he has been really making outstanding work, and we always had a very close cooperation. So many thanks. Congrats, David, and the very best wishes for the new chair. And I do hope that we will continue with a very close cooperation. If we can please move to the first slide. Yeah. So this is a quite similar slide to the one that I already presented to you in the month of November. The main difference is that now all this legislation is in place. So basically, the bulk of the legal acts which were to be adopted by the 20th of January 2022 are already in place. And in addition, we had also in place the two legal acts which are closely related to the animal health law in relation to the horse passport. Just to draw your attention to the fact that we have already amended the Delegated Act on the horse passport, and I included the reference. So we have issued a correcting act. And then still we have two of the most critical acts related to the fight against antimicrobial resistance, and we are still working on them. And as you all know, the Commission attached the highest priority to the finalization of these legal acts. To give you some good news, I'm pleased to inform you that the Commission has already allocated some funds to support member states on the collection of data on sales and use of antimicrobials. But we have also allocated funds to set up hands-on trainings for veterinarians and farmers across EU member states to support the implementation of the regulation on Vnp. So we consider that it is quite important that veterinarians and farmers are well trained to implement our legislation. If we can please move to the next slide, I would like to refer more specifically to the two outstanding legal acts. So the first one, it's rather controversial, I could say, which concerns the implementing act designating antimicrobials or group of antimicrobials reserved for the treatment of certain infections in humans. And I have included in the slide some of the areas that could be more interesting for you. I think that you are all well aware of this draft legal act. So first of all, to be very clear that the antimicrobials and group of antimicrobials which are listed shall not be used in veterinary medicinal products, and then marketing authorization applications for the products contained in the list will be refused, but also the existing marketing authorizations of these antimicrobials or groups of antimicrobials shall cease to be valid. Then, in order to give all the parties enough time for the implementation of these legal acts, the regulation should be applicable within 6 months. And then you see that there is also a clear reference to the system to revise this list in light of the new evidences. So this is just a draft. You can also see on the slide the substances which were included in the draft, which are mirroring the recommendations which were issued by the agency in its scientific advice. So this is not the final text, this is just a draft. The public feedback it's ongoing, and you have all a deadline the 17th of May. We are already receiving quite a lot of feedback from the different stakeholders, but in light with our international obligations, we have also notified to the WTO SPS for comments, and in this case, the deadline for the comments is the 20th of June. So in light of these comments, the Commission will consider whether or not it is necessary to revise the draft, and then we will continue with the following steps, which are the possible opinion of the Standing Committee that we intend to take before summer break, followed by adoption and publication in the official journal. So I do hope that we can finalize this outstanding act before summer. If we could please go to the next step, to the next slide, sorry. I would like to touch upon the Delegated Act on imports of animals and products of animal origin. As you know, this act is closely linked with the previous one on the list, because what we do have in the legislation, it's a ban on imports of animals and products of animal origin treated with antimicrobials from the list, but also used as growth promoters or to increase yield. So in order to be able to implement this ban, we had as the first step, and this has been one of the reasons to be a bit late, to amend the official controls regulation. And it was done in order to have a single framework of official controls at the level of the European Union. So this amendment is done, it is already published, it happened last year, and what we are doing now is, as the first step, to include in the ongoing delegated act, for which we have already started discussions with the experts from the member states, it's to define the scope of this delegated act, which, although it is at the very early stages of the discussion, the idea would be to apply to food producing animals and products of animal origin intended for export to the Union. And then the intention of the Commission, which is in principle supported by the Member States, is to mirror the scope of the legislation on residues. So this is the starting point, and then we will see how this ends. Then, in relation to specific requirements in order to implement the ban that we do have in the regulation, the Commission is proposing to follow the same approach that we are following in other pieces of the legislation, which is basically to only allow consignments from the goods coming from listed third countries. And in this respect, third countries could need to provide the Commission with the necessary warranties that they can ensure the compliance with the ban established in the legislation. And also the consignments entering the Union, they should be accompanied by the relevant official certificate. So this is the first step, where we will be finalizing, hopefully, discussions at the expert group level. Not sure if before the summer break, but this is our intention. And then, as we have done with the rest of the legal acts, we will continue with the public feedback, notification to the WTO, adoption by the Commission. And here, as we are talking about a delegated act, the procedure is different. And as you know, it goes to the Council and to the Parliament, because there is a period where they can express their objections, and then it could be published in the official journal. Then, once we have these requirements established in the delegated act, under the legal framework of the official controls regulation, the Commission will establish the list of authorized third countries for imports into the Union, and then we will amend the relevant models of certificates. So this is the information I can share with you at this point in time, but I will be happy to keep you updated at the possible next occasions. Then, if we could go please to the next slide, I would like to give you an update on the situation in relation to our famous Article 152, the transitional rules in relation to packaging and labeling. And this is one of the difficulties that we have found when we have started to think in the implementation of the Gmp regulation. So for those of you who are not familiar with the problems that we have had, the matter was that marketing authorization holders, they were not in a position to comply with the requirements in relation to packaging and labeling at the date of application of the regulation. But equally, the competent authorities were not in a position to process all the necessary variations that they have to follow in order to put things in the right context. So this was not possible to be done in a timely manner by the time that the regulation could be applicable. So we had to find out, I would say, an urgent solution. First of all, to ensure a continued availability of VMPs in the Union, but also to give legal certainty to all the parties. And in this spirit, the Commission presented a regulation to the Parliament and to the Council, where we were laying down some transitional rules only for the packaging and labeling of veterinary medicines products authorized or registered, so covering also homeopathics in order to allow for the possibility to have, for a given period of time, the possibility to have the provisions on packaging and labeling in accordance to the old directive. So in the proposal, the Commission has given a transitional period of 5 years, and the idea is that this new regulation is applicable as from the 28th of January, so with retroactive character. I'm pleased to inform you that the proposal by the Commission has been adopted by the European Parliament. It's in the process to be adopted in the Council, and if confirmed and if it is adopted this month, this regulation could be published already this month or at the beginning of next month. So with many thanks to everyone, because this is a clear example that we can achieve a lot and find urgent solutions if everyone is working in the same direction. Moving to the next slide, please. You can also see another matter which arise, and this is in relation to the questions and answers that we have published on the requirements for active substances used as starting materials in veterinary medicinal products. So here there were some issues related to the interpretation of Article 94, so in particular on whether or not there was a need for the certificates of good manufacturing practices. And again, following the very fruitful and constructive discussions that we had not only with the member states, but also with experts from the agency, we managed all together to issue these questions and answers that I think that were very important to ensure a common understanding in the application of the regulation. If we can please move to the next slide. Yes, this is already the same slide that I presented in the month of November, so there is no major progress so far, because as you know, priority has been attached to the finalization of the legal acts and to solve some of the urgent problems that we had at the end of last year. But we do hope to already start with some work after the summer break, if this is possible. And going to the next slide, please. Just to very briefly highlight that, I mean, we are also working on other non-legislative actions and also in issues related to the implementation. I have only highlighted some. One, for example, is the notice to applicants that we are all well aware that is a very valued tool by the network and stakeholders. But this is not any longer something in the new legislation, but nevertheless we are considering how to continue to communicate those key aspects, the interpretation of the legislation, and of course always involving the network. And then we are quite busy in the Commission with the questions in relation to the interpretation of new provisions in close cooperation with the agency, the network, but also we are receiving many questions from different stakeholders. We are also starting to receive some feedback from you on issues related to the implementation, and I'm very pleased and grateful to have this feedback. And also we are identifying possible issues that could require the amendment of the tertiary legislation. So for example, there is some work ongoing in relation to the Delegated Act on Annex 2, just to mention some. So if we could please go to the next slide. Yes, here just some few words in relation to the ongoing revision of the EMA fee system. As you know, the objective is to create a cost-based fee system that will ensure the ongoing and future sustainability of the regulatory system through appropriate funding and flexibility to adapt to the fast changing sector in which we are operating while ensuring business continuity. The study, which was conducted in support of the impact assessment that we have always to undertake, was already completed and published, and you can find the link in the presentation. The impact assessment, which is another necessary step, is ongoing and hopefully it's about to be finalized. And then the Commission proposal is expected to be adopted by Q3 this year, so it is coming very soon. And later on, the co-decision procedure will start as soon as the Commission proposal is adopted. As you know, we will start then the negotiations with the Council and with the European Parliament. So this is where we are so far, at least on the main issues. So if we could please go to the next slide. Thank you. Here we have what is next, and this time in the slide you will see in a way identified in terms of the priority. So we have 5 legal acts for which we have a shall in the legislation. So the Commission must adopt these legal acts by the 28th of January 2025. So we still have 3 years, which as it looks like a very long period of time, but then at the end it is very short, as we have seen in these last 3 years. And here I'm pleased to inform you that priority 1 for these 5 legal acts will be allocated to the implementing acts or implementing acts on good manufacturing practices for VMPs and also for active substances. But of course, we will also pay attention to the other ones because we want to be on time with adoption. And if we can put things in place before the date which is foreseen in the legislation, we will do our best. Then we have in the middle 2 acts for which work is already in progress. So as you know, one important one for which there is no legal deadline is the list of antimicrobials not to be used outside the terms of the marketing authorization. So colleagues from the agency are working on the scientific advice, and they can only finalize it once we have finalized the list of antimicrobials reserved for human use. But we do expect the agency to deliver at the end of this year. And then the other legal act concerned the rules for oral administration via drinking water or top dressing, for which, as you know, the EMA advice has been issued a while ago, and we need to work on the drafting. You can also find on the screen those legal acts for which there is no legal deadline for adoption, but then we will start to work on them once we finalize the rest of the acts that you have on the screen. And then if we move to the next slide, just to give you some information on other activities which are not legal necessarily, but which are still important. So we have the obligation to present a report to the Parliament and to the Council on the assessment of the situation as regards the treatment with medicinal products of Equide and their exclusion for the food chain, including third country imports. This is a very complex matter, I could say, and this report is to be accompanied, if appropriate, by any action by the Commission. So this is due by 2025, and the Commission will ask for external to prepare a study. The good news is that we have already the necessary funds available, and we do hope to start the initiative at the beginning of next year. In the next slide, you can see the other report that is to be presented to the Parliament and to the Council. This one is on traditional herbal products used to treat animals. This is due by 2027. We will also have a study to support the Commission report. The money is earmarked, and we plan to start the initiative in 2024. And then I would like to take the opportunity to thank the French presidency for the event that they have organized recently on this matter, because this would be a very good source of information. And then, as always, in the next slide, you can find the necessary links to our website and to the link where you can provide your feedback. And to conclude, in the next slide, I would like to inform you that the Commission, together with the Presidency and the agency, we are planning to organize an event on the 20th of June to celebrate the entry into application of our regulation. The event will take place physically, and it will take place here in Brussels. But we are planning to have the event web stream because, the capacity for physical participants could be limited. So invitations will be sent very, very soon. And with this, I would like to conclude my presentation. And I would like to thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to come to this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Eva. As always, your input is highly appreciated. And we have a number of questions that came in on the chat already. May I confirm whether you will be able to stay with us until the end of today's session? Fantastic, because then we will go as planned and take the questions later today when we have a general questions and answers session. So again, thank you very much for your presentation, and I would like to hand the floor back to Ivo Klaassen, who already welcomed you to today's meeting. You will know that Ivo heads the Veterinary Medicines Division at the agency since 2018, but in July last year, he has also been appointed as the Deputy Executive Director of the agency, and we as his staff are inordinately proud of that. But more important for this meeting, Ivo has 30 years of experience in vaccine production, QC, QA, R&D, and regulatory affairs, both for human and veterinary medicines. And he has also been a member of the Committee for Veterinary Medicinal Products. And he will now give an update on the implementation of the Vnp regulation and secondary legislation. The floor is yours, Ivo.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for that introduction. And it's good to hear that the staff is proud of me. I am extremely proud of my staff, because I think together with the staff and the network, we have delivered on the major topic of the Vnp regulation. So, and that's the topic of this discussion. I would like to give you an update on the implementation of the Vnp so the Vnp regulation and the secondary legislation. On the Vnp Reg program status update, before I start looking at this slide, I think it's good to realize that it is only 3.5 months since go live date on the 28th of February 2022 of systems that have been developed in an extremely short time, some from scratch, other from already existing projects or systems. Now, we all know that there are problems with bugs that need to be resolved, but also other problems that we didn't expect that have arisen over the past 3.5 months. And the team is working hard to get these issues resolved. But obviously, I think we all are in the same boat. We need to be patient. I saw a remark in the chat there that there are still issues with not being able to fulfill regulatory requirements, like, for example, submitting Vnras because of not complete data sets being in the system, and there may be other technical issues as well. For me, 2022, and even though it's not labeled like that officially in the regulation, should be seen as a transition year where we will have to take stock regularly on how we are progressing, but where we will need to live with some of the problems, resolve those problems, and be a bit patient on both sides, and then hopefully sooner rather than later we can claim the success. I would like to claim success right now already on one topic, and that is that this is the probably the first system that has been developed in the European network where we aim for single data entry and data to be reused in several systems. It's setting the basis for that. It's not there yet, we're not there yet, but certainly the systems that have been developed do have the potential to deliver on that. It will be extremely important to ensure indeed data quality and that all the products are in there. But I think we can achieve that situation, and then this is going to be a very powerful tool, not only for managing regulatory processes, reporting sales data, looking at antimicrobial sales and use, but also for other questions that may pop up, whether regulatory questions or looking at what the impact of the use of certain veterinary medicines is. Having said that, this slide should be known to most of you because it's been presented many times. Those are the four systems in the program that we've worked on. And in this relation, the status update, the manufacturing and wholesale distributors database, the Union product database, and the Union pharmacovigilance database all went live on the 28th of January 2022. Behind these three systems, there are at least 7 other systems that have been updated, IT systems, and that all had to go live at the same time. So you may understand some of the challenges that we have had in developing those systems. The antimicrobial sales and use data collection, the development for that system has started in January 2022, and it is expected to see its first deliverables towards the end of this year, early next year. The next slide is an update on where we are. If I can have the next, thank you very much. One of the key elements in that can bring the functionality to both the Union product database as well as the pharmacovigilance reporting system, which is update of legacy data. And this is a status update. And I think what is relevant here is when you look at the total numbers at the bottom, you see that we anticipated that we would need to upload about 41,000, let's say 42,000 products with permanent IDs. And that is a combination of centrally authorized products, nationally authorized products, and MRP DCP products, where we also count the national data sets that are linked to common data sets for the MRP DCP products. And what you can see in this slide as well is that where we do have a backlog is in the upload of national data sets. So where and this particularly for the decentralized procedures, I think all others we are very much on track. Where there's still a backlog in the upload of the data sets, but I rest assured that the member states are working hard to get the data in, and the completeness rate for getting national data set in is at this moment approximately 75%. And we started at approximately 25 to 30% in January, so the number is still increasing and still more data are coming in. The NCAs are supported in the upload of the legacy data and in cleansing the data, and we've done that over the past year and we will continue to do so. On the next slide, you will see that we have a number of help desk channels available that are available both for NCAs and for industry to contact. And after the first experiences, we decided to have dedicated user support channels through the EMA service desk for the UPD, for the pharmacovigilance reporting, and for GMDP. For other EMA system-related issues, there's a separate service desk as well. We also have opened the channel for regulatory questions because we do understand that going live with a new regulation does create a lot of regulatory queries. So that's, you find the link here. And other questions can still be asked through the functional mailbox, which is the Vet Change program. On the next slide, we reported several times in this meeting, in previous meetings last year, on the change management, something that was developed in the past year, that was rolled out to support marketing authorization holders, NCAs, and veterinarians as most important stakeholders in get them acquainted with the procedures, the systems, etc. For us, the priority remains to support NCAs to complete legacy data upload and to support all the users of the systems released. There have been several webinars for NCAs and industry since December still, and the recordings, presentations and Q&As are available on EUNTC for the NCAs and on the EMA website for the industry. Even though we had scheduled to publish a newsletter directly prior to this meeting, I'm afraid you will have to wait, because under the pressure that we're on at this moment, it will be probably at the end of this week or next week that you will see a new newsletter. The frequency of those newsletters is now down to once every 3 months. We think that's enough to keep you updated. But please don't hesitate to, if you have any queries, to contact us on any of the email addresses that we've seen in the previous link. An important development, I think, over the past period has been the establishment of the Veterinary IT Systems Improvement Advisory Group, or VSIAG. And that group, which is embedded in the secondary legislation on the UPD, is a group that will help the agency in prioritizing requirements after this program has been closed. And the kickoff meeting for that group was held on the 5th of April 2022. Prioritization means that we will take into account the experiences of the stakeholders, all stakeholders, industry, healthcare professionals, Commission and the national competent authorities, and try to translate them into requirements that would need to be, functionalities that would need to be prioritized for development in UPD or in EVVET. Then obviously after that there will be a discussion on feasibility, availability of the budget. Currently we are still in a phase where we haven't completely delivered on the minimal viable product, in the sense that we still haven't delivered the module for parallel trade, the upload. And the module for homeopathics upload has been delivered a few weeks ago. So we're almost there, and we are focusing very much on bug fixing in the system in order to make life for everyone more agreeable. So prioritization of the system improvements continues in the current governance until summer. And the next VSIAG meeting in June is to familiarize the member with the product backlogs. Now, what you see here on this screen is also the composition of the VSIAG, with 8 representatives from member states. Industry is represented here by people from Animal Health Europe and from Access VetMed. Animal healthcare professionals is represented by 3 representatives. Commission with 2 representatives, and then the agency with 2 to 3 representatives, and participation of further EMA staff as needed. And I will be chairing the VSIAG for the future time. On the advices, I would like to inform you that all submitted advices have been published on the EMA website, and as Eva presented in her previous presentation, these advices are very often the basis for secondary legislation that will be developed by the Commission. I think, you know, it's good to have full transparency there on what the agency has advised, what the original mandate was that the Commission gave to the agency, because that's also in there. And then obviously all the legal acts that are being developed are also being published, so you can compare how they relate to the original advices. The work on requests for 1 EMA advice is ongoing and on schedule to be submitted in time. That's the advice that also Eva referred to, which is the list of substances not to be used or used subject to certain conditions under the so-called cascade. And we do expect further requests for advices later in 2022 or early 2023. I would like to take this opportunity to also give you an update on where we are with the European veterinary big data strategy. You all remember we had a workshop, a stakeholder meeting on that in June last year, and we developed a strategy from that. And when you look at this beautiful flower that you see in front of us, you see how we see that, you know, working from working on regulatory business cases, data literacy, working with stakeholders, in looking at the data landscape and trying to develop a sustainable data ecosystem that all comes together. And then the question, of course, is what are we going to do in the development of the big data strategy? Because I think those regulatory business cases are actually challenging, but I think some of them are really very obvious, and I will address them later in this presentation. I think more challenging even is to identify the current data landscape. Where can we find relevant data? How can we access those data? How are we going to use them? So overall, we've translated this, let's say, vision into the big data strategy, which then has to deliver on this in the coming years. If you next slide, we've made that very practical and very pragmatical, I think. And some of you may have seen the manuscript that was published in the Regulatory Rapporteur, which is about coming from from data application into data connection. Let's put it that way. Data collection into data connection, I think, was the title. So the first phase is very much about data collection, identifying those data sources, collecting the data, and a lot of data will already be collected under the new veterinary regulation. So, but data are pretty useless if you don't use them, if you don't do anything with them. So connecting the data and putting them to a purpose, I think that's what we would like to do. And that's the medium-term phase, data integration and analytic insection. And then in the longer term, because starting to work from structured data sets first, and then in the longer term phase, looking more at other data sources and connecting all these data sources, and then expanding the analytic capabilities. And this is just a draft timeline, but which runs well into beyond 2025. I think it is something that the network will need to invest in. We're trying to connect with the stakeholders on this as well. Industry demonstrating also interest in this, given that it is there's a proper legal basis for that, and that we're doing the right thing. That's always the question. The European Veterinary Big Data Strategy, next slide please, has been adopted at the HMA meeting last week. It will be published on the EMA website. And the provision of the UPD functionalities, as I said before, ties in with the short-term phase described in the strategy. So I would like to say that we are already on the road to implementation. However, I think it's good to, as I said, to keep connected with the stakeholders. So we are scheduling to organize a second Vet Big Data Stakeholder Forum, which will be held in Q4 of 2022. And the Save the Date announcement will be published in due course. I promised you some of the practical use cases that we would like to develop, and here at an extremely high level, and I do realize that you see some of those use cases where we feel big data can become relevant. Pharmacovigilance, I think it's an obvious one, where we rely on reported data, but we may also look into other data sources than just the data reported through companies or through veterinarians, or different ways of reporting. Antimicrobial resistance, where we really need to link the sales and use data to other data, really to come to a proper risk assessment and proper risk management for those for the use of antimicrobials. Environmental risk assessment. Regulatory submission, looking at real-world data, real-world evidence, where I think it's interesting to mention that FDA has already published some years ago a guidance document on how to deal with real-world data and real-world evidence for the submission of or to support efficacy for veterinary medicinal products. We were completely unaware of this document, I must admit, until we started looking into these things ourselves. And I think it's really interesting, and it may very well lead to a similar approach in in Europe. Manufacturing and inspections, the innovation of development of veterinary medicinal products, as I said, demonstrating efficacy and effectiveness is one of those things, and potentially withdrawal periods, cascade use, and whatever we can do there. So these are a few examples of potential use cases that we could develop in the near future. And I would like to bring it here because I do feel, again, like we did with the Vnp reg, that it will add value if we can enter into this process with the network of regulatory authorities, but also involving the stakeholders very much. And with that, I would like to end this presentation. And I'm afraid I have to apologize myself because I have to leave for another meeting. So I'd like to give the floor back to Barbara. Barbara.
Thank you very much, Ivo, and thank you very much for the update. I trust that is appreciated by the participants. We're right on time to lead over to the next speaker, who is David Murphy. And as Ivo already mentioned earlier, David is the current chair of the Committee for Veterinary Medicinal Products. His second term is ending, and so this will be the last time that he will present you with the Cvmp update. David is a veterinarian who graduated in Dublin and also worked at the University of Glasgow before joining the Health Products Regulatory Authority in Ireland. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that you're all keeping well. For my presentation this afternoon, I'm going to give you an update on Cvmp activities relating to the new veterinary regulation. And for those of you who tuned into my presentations at both the March and November info days last year, also updates on Cvmp activities relating to the NVR, you will note some similarities between those presentations and this one. I have followed the same format, and I've reused a number of slides to repeat or to emphasize certain points. But as has been said, my second term as Cvmp member has come to an end, so it's the last time you're going to see some of these slides. By way of introduction, I would just like to quickly remind you of the role of the Cvmp. The committee carries out tasks conferred on it under Regulation 2019/6 and Regulation 726 of 2004. And essentially that's to assist the agency with its responsibility to provide the member states and the institutions of the community with the best possible scientific advice on any question relating to veterinary medicines. The specific tasks of the Cvmp are listed there in the bullets, but they would include evaluating applications for marketing authorization of new veterinary medicines, supervising the quality, safety and efficacy of medicines following their introduction to the marketplace, evaluating veterinary medicines authorized at national level that are referred to the agency for a harmonized position across the EU, and recommending safe limits for residues of medicines used in food-producing animals. In addition to those various product assessment-related activities, this Cvmp, together with a number of expert working parties, supports product development through the provision of scientific advice and preparing scientific guidelines and regulatory guidance for the pharmaceutical industry. Next slide, please. So coming back to the purpose of this presentation, which is to provide an update on Cvmp activities relating to the new regulation. For the presentation, I'm going to use as my guide the Cvmp work plan for 2022, and the primary focus for the Cvmp and its working parties in recent years has been to deliver on a number of tasks to facilitate implementation of the new veterinary regulation, and it's the regulation itself that largely shapes the work plan, the 2022 work plan, at least for the Cvmp. Also, just to note that the work plan takes into account various recommendations that are included in the agency regulatory science strategy to 2025, and also recommendations or activities highlighted in the European Medicines Agency Network Strategy to 2025. Next slide, please. And again, just to know, because it is really important to keep emphasizing the point that in terms of the work or activities of the Cvmp, at all times we try and take into account the primary objectives of the revision of the legislation, and it is really important that we, in implementing the regulation, don't lose sight of those primary objectives, which are namely to support new product development, improve medicines availability, reduce administrative burden, and address the public health threat of antimicrobial resistance, all the while guaranteeing the highest level of public and animal health and environmental protection. Next slide, please. Okay, in addition, regarding the use of animals in product development and medicines testing, the Cvmp will look to promote the appropriate application of the principles of the 3 Rs when implementing the new legislation. So at all times, there will be a focus on 3 Rs. While seeking to deliver on the various NVR-related tasks, it is important that the core activities of the Cvmp are not neglected, and for those activities, the Cvmp is committed to strengthening the quality of the scientific review process, ensuring consistency of outputs, and the Cvmp assessments generally. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, in this series of slides, I just want to look at some of the NVR-related activities in more detail. Previous speakers have touched on some topics, and others will be covered in more detail in later presentations. There are a number of activities in the work plan aimed at supporting product development and innovation. And one of the activities that it was delivered in 2021 was the establishment of the Novel Therapies and Technologies Working Party as a successor to Advent. So as I say, that Working Party was established last year. Specific activities that Working Party is currently engaged in relate to developing guidance on cell therapies, bacteriophages, and monoclonal antibodies. The latter relating to a guideline that's in development at the level of VICH. In relation to the cell therapies and bacteriophage topics, concept papers have been published for public consultation. The closing date for those, the consultation on those concept papers was the end of April. So I'm assuming, although I haven't seen, but I'm assuming that comments will have been received in respect of both of those concept papers, and that those comments will be taken into account in the drafting of guidance. For both of those guidance documents, there's a target completion date for that work of December of next year. That's 2023. Next slide, please. In 2021, the Commission finalized and published the Delegated Regulation on the revision of Annex 2. That's the document that sets out high-level data requirements for application dossiers. Within the annex, it is acknowledged that additional guidance from the agency on specific topics to complement some elements of the annex would be required. And I'm pleased to say that some of that work has already been completed with finalization of guidance on topics such as the vaccine antigen master file, data requirements for vaccine platform technology master file. Also, there's a final guideline on data requirements for multi-strain dossiers, and there's a final revised guideline on requirements for field efficacy data for veterinary vaccines. So that's work that has been completed. I would also like to bring to your attention that advice on the procedure for vaccine antigen master file certification has been published by the agency, and that a similar advice relating to platform technology master file certification was adopted by the Cvmp this week at its May meeting and will be published in the coming days. Next slide, please. The work on Article 40.5 of the regulation is continuing. With this provision, where there is a change to a marketing authorization that involves a change to pharmaceutical form, administration route, or dosage, and this change is deemed to lead to a reduction in antimicrobial or antiparasitic resistance, or to an improvement in the overall benefit-risk balance, then the data supporting that change shall be protected for a period of 4 years. This provision, as I've said previously, is seen by the industry as holding a lot of promise to promote innovation and development of existing products. As you can see, the Cvmp is in the process of elaborating a reflection paper on criteria for the application of Article 40.5. In approaching this work, the Cvmp will seek to apply the provision to promote product development where that is possible, and that will be within the parameters provided for in the legislation. It was intended that this reflection paper be finalized in July 2021. But the work is not yet completed, and that's largely due to the need for further discussion, legal input in relation to the interpretation of that provision. And because of the need for that consultation, the timeline has slipped, and it is now we expected that the guideline, the reflection paper will not be published until later on this year, December being a target. Next slide, please. Under the heading of supporting product availability, the Cvmp is continuing its work on an approach to implementing Article 23 of the regulation, which relates to applications for limited markets. You will remember in July of last year, the Cvmp adopted a final reflection paper on classification of a product as intended for a limited market and eligibility for Article 23. The reflection paper sets out the approach to applying the Article 23 provision. And basically, with this approach, as you can see in the right of the slide, there are 2 questions to be addressed. The first question is the product classified as a limited market? If the answer to that question is yes, then the second question is, does the product satisfy criteria for eligibility for Article 23? Next slide, please. If a product is considered eligible for Article 23, then gaps in safety and efficacy data as provided for in relevant data requirements guidelines will be accepted. And data requirements guidelines for products considered eligible for Article 23 were adopted also in July of last year by the committee, with an effective date coinciding with the application date of the regulation. So that's January of this year. So those guidelines are effective currently. If a product that is classified as a limited market is not eligible for consideration under Article 23, well then by default a full Annex 2 compliant dossier would be required. However, noting that products intended for limited market should benefit from this classification, even if considered not eligible for Article 23, the Cvmp is in the process of drafting specific data requirements guidance for products classified as limited market, but deemed not eligible for Article 23. And the basic purpose of this guidance would be to highlight how the flexibility that is provided for in Annex 2, where certain studies could be omitted if justified, how that flexibility can be applied to such products. And it is expected that final guidelines will be delivered in by January of 2023. So that's a piece of work that is ongoing. Next slide, please. In terms of the experience to date, I can advise that the Cvmp over the past number of months has considered 13 requests for classification and eligibility. And of those requests, all 13, in fact, were classified as limited market. That included products, 6 chemicals and 7 vaccine products. Of those 13, 6 were considered eligible for consideration under Article 23, 2 chemical products and 4 vaccines. In terms of the experience of the discussion at Cvmp, the discussion around the limited market classification has generally not been controversial, and you can sort of see that from the fact that the 13 requests, all 13 requests were classified as a limited market, and a lot of that will have to do with the experience with the old mums policy, as it were. But you know, there are, in terms of the second question, is a product eligible for consideration under Article 23? There are a number of points there that the Cvmp is sort of working through and trying to deal with currently. In terms of the primary reason for refusing eligibility for Article 23, the primary reason is that products that are refused are considered not to address an unmet need due to the availability of alternatives. So that sort of is a primary reason for refusal, based on our experience to date. Next slide, please. Also under the heading of support and product availability, the Cvmp has completed its work on an approach to implementing Article 25. This the provision allows for the authorization of products in exceptional circumstances in the absence of certain quality, safety or efficacy data that would be a standard requirement in accordance with Annex 2. A guideline on data requirements for such products was finalized by the committee in January 2022 and has been published. Next slide, please. Under the heading of supporting authorization procedures generally, there are a number of ongoing activities that I want to provide you with updates on. The revision of the Cvmp recommendation on the evaluation of the benefit-risk balance of VMPs that's ongoing. A concept paper on this topic was published for consultation until the 28th of February, and the drafting of the revised recommendation has been reactivated following the consultation and will take into account comments received. It is expected that the work on the guideline will continue into 2023. In relation to Article 34, the regulation, the Cvmp is proposing to draft guidance to complement the criteria detailed in Article 34 for determining the prescription status of products. A concept paper relating to this piece of work was out for consultation until the 30th of April. And I can report that the comments received on the concept paper are generally supportive of the activity. It's expected that a draft of the guideline itself will be published for consultation in Q3 of this year, and with the guideline to be finalized by the end of the year. It is felt that, or the reason for triggering this particular activity is that Cvmp felt that guidance in this area was considered necessary, given the opening up of the centralized procedure, in particular, given the likelihood that the agency will be processing more products that may not automatically be assigned prescription-only status. And on this specific point, I can advise that the agency has received a number of notifications of intent to submit through the centralized procedure applications for generics of nationally authorized products with intended submission dates in the second half of this year. So that's a sort of will be a new area of work for the Cvmp, and it'll be interesting to see how the agency and the Cvmp approach to the handling of those applications. Next slide, please. Okay, you will be, in terms of pharmacovigilance, you will be aware that the new regulation outlines a significant change in approach to post-authorization safety monitoring, and to prepare, getting ready for this future system. There's been very significant activity in this particular area over the past 2 to 3 years. So a lot of the preparation has been done. The main focus now for 2022 in the pharmacovigilance area is essentially to bed in the signal management process. And one significant development that I would like to highlight in this area is the establishment of a signal management expert group. And this is a group of national experts, which also includes representation from the agency, which will cooperate in the conduct of signal management tasks, and essentially doing that work on behalf of the network. The primary tasks of this particular group will be to identify, prioritize, and assess safety issues using the pharmacovigilance database, and make recommendations to the pharmacovigilance working party on signals detected and proposed regulatory action. And with the establishment of that group, it is hoped that will, it would hope that it will avoid duplication of signal management activities in different member states. So I think it's a very significant development, and hopefully will simplify future pharmacovigilance processes. But you will hear more detail in terms of ongoing pharmacovigilance activities later on at this meeting. Next slide, please. As mentioned previously, addressing the public health threat associated with AMR is one of the primary objectives of the new legislation, and this is a priority area and has been for some time for the agency and the Cvmp. And many of Cvmp's proposed activities for the next 5 years focus on assisting with the effective implementation of the legislation to ensure it achieves its objectives in strengthening the EU's actions in this area. Next slide, please. And there are, the number of activities in the AMR area is considerable. A number of them are detailed on this slide. You have already been provided with some updates in terms of the reserve list and the list of antimicrobials restricted when used under the cascade, so I won't repeat any of that. But just to say that there has been a delay because of the delay in finalizing those implementing acts, it has had some consequences for other documents. In particular, it has impacted on progress with the risk assessment guideline, which is not now expected to be finalized until Q4 of this year. The work on elaborating criteria for determining exceptional cases when antimicrobial prophylaxis would be accepted is progressing. A draft of the guideline has recently been out for consultation. The consultation period, in fact, closed just recently at the end of April, and the guideline will now be finalized in light of comments received. So you can expect to have a final guideline in Q3 of this year. Once the guideline itself, once the reflection paper is finalized, there will be a need for certain follow-on actions, and those would include a review of indications for existing antimicrobial products to ensure that they're aligned with the guideline. And there will also be a need for a review of the current or existing intramammary and antimicrobials efficacy guidelines. Next slide, please. Of the various activities relating to environmental risk, I can advise that the work on Article 18.7 was finalized in February of this year. Personally, I'm very pleased with the agreed approach to the implementation of Article 18.7, in that it will will lead to a dramatic reduction in the requirement for environmental risk assessments for future generic applications. So I think that that's very positive in terms of the agreed approach relating to that particular provision. In relation to Article 37 2J of the regulation, this is a provision that essentially prohibits the authorization of products for use in food producing species that include substances classified as PBT, except where those substances are determined to be essential to prevent or control a serious risk to animal health. In order to ensure consistency in the application of this provision and to provide some predictability for applicants, this document, the Cvmp has prepared a document that looks to establish clear guidance or criteria for making a determination that a substance is essential for animal health. This is a reflection paper, and it's currently out for consultation, and that is until the end of this month. Following the close of the public consultation, it's expected that the guideline will be finalized, and hopefully we'll be in a position to publish a final guideline in Q3 of this year. But again, just to note, that consultation period is still open and will close on the 31st of May. Next slide, please. Okay, for activities relating to consumer safety, I would like to highlight one point actually that's not NVR related, but is significant nonetheless. And this relates to a request from the Commission to both the European Medicines Agency and to EFSA to come up with a joint approach on consumer exposure assessment methodologies for residues in food of animal origin. This is a very important piece of work in that it is expected to lead to a change which could have implications for the current approach to establishing MRLs. The update that I'd like to provide you with is that the Cvmp at its April meeting adopted a draft report, and that report then has gone on to the relevant EFSA scientific committee. My understanding, it was also adopted or endorsed by that committee a number of weeks ago and is now under review by the Commission. Once the draft report has been reviewed by the Commission, the expectation is that it will be published for a 2-month period of public consultation. So that is a document to be aware of, and if you have an interest in that particular area, please do review the draft document and submit any comments you have through the normal channels. In terms of the finalization of this particular activity, the Commission has given a deadline of November of this year to finalize the recommendation. So that would be following the close of that public consultation. Next slide, please. In terms of selected other activities, there is one in particular that I would like to highlight. And again, this is not NVR related, but is significant for industry, again, nonetheless. And this relates to titanium dioxide. You will remember that in September of last year, the agency delivered its assessment of the impact of the removal of titanium dioxide from the list of authorized food additives. So the assessment was on the impact for both human and veterinary medicines. Arising from that assessment, legislation was introduced in January of this year, which allows for the continued use of titanium dioxide with a clause that requires a review of the situation after 3 years. So in the meantime, until such time as that review, the pharmaceutical industry is encouraged to make all possible efforts to accelerate research and development of alternatives to replace titanium dioxide. In terms of providing some guidance in this area to industry, it was agreed with the Commission that QWP would prepare a Q&A document to encourage pharmaceutical industry to take action and to give guidance on how to proceed if a product contains titanium dioxide, what scientific data is needed to have in terms of the removal or replacement of titanium dioxide, and what regulatory actions are expected. So that is a Q&A document that's currently in development. I understand, although didn't participate, that there was a QWP interested parties meeting in the last number of weeks where that draft document was shared with industry associations. And arising from that interested parties meeting, there was agreement that industry would be given an opportunity to comment on the document. And my understanding is that comments, the deadline for those comments is tomorrow, in fact, the 13th of May. So once those comments are received, the expectation is that the Q&A document will be finalized in consideration of those comments and is expected to be published before the end of June. Next slide, please. Okay, in terms of Article 156, I won't dwell on this. Dr. Zamora in her presentation also already made reference to it, but just to say that the Commission's report in this area is keenly awaited. Depending on what that report looks like and the recommendations of it, there is the potential for significant activity in the network and for industry. But again, that would depend on the conclusions of the final Commission report in this area. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's a very high-level run-through ongoing activities at the level of the Cvmp. As you can see, they're various and numerous. And just to highlight, there are sort of numerous challenges that the Cvmp has faced over the past while and will continue to face. And perhaps the greatest challenge of them all is to realize the primary objectives of the regulation in face of increasing demands to address the risk of AMR, to ensure consumer safety and to adequately protect the environment. And again, you can see how the work of the agency has been challenged, in particular in terms of the AMR area in the elaboration of the implementing regulation on the human reserve list. Next slide, please. Okay, very briefly then, as I did in November last year, I would just like to remind you of the Agency Management Board review of working parties or groups that support scientific committees at the agency. I won't dwell on this slide. If you want to go to the next one, please. The review group recommended that the working parties of the various committees should be reorganized into 5 principal domains. The working parties reporting directly to the Cvmp will make up the veterinary domain. However, there will be veterinary interest in a number of other domains, and notably the quality domain and the non-clinical safety domain, where the QWP and the 3Rs working party will sit. The relevant committees were requested to consider if all existing working parties were needed, and those to be retained, for those to be retained to refresh or to renew membership. And on the veterinary side, I can say that that piece of work is complete. And the one update just I want to highlight in this area is that in April, both the Cvmp and the Chmp agreed the membership of the joint Cvmp-Chmp working group on the application of the 3Rs. So over the coming months, we can expect renewed activity in this particular area. The Management Board Review Group also recommended that the agency should introduce systemic and structured stakeholder engagement at domain level to underpin strategic priority planning. And this is something that the veterinary domain is actively working on. And I know that over the last number of years, there has been a lot of engagement between the agency and stakeholders in relation to various specific elements of the NVR. But what I'm talking about here is involving stakeholders strategy planning, and that's something, as I say, you will hear more about in the future. So next slide, please. So to conclude on my presentation for today, I would like to acknowledge nearly halfway through the year, not quite, that there has been significant progress on delivery of the 22 work plan to date. Clearly, there's a lot more work to be done, but I would very much like to take again this opportunity to recognize the support provided to the Cvmp by a very large number of national experts over the past 3 years, either as members of Cvmp working parties or as members of dedicated expert group working on specific activities. In addition, I would also like to recognize the support provided to the Cvmp, its various working parties and expert groups by agency staff. And just to note that, the time, I do fully appreciate or recognize at the time and considerable efforts of all concerned. So I think it's appropriate and timely to recognize that. In terms of challenges, there are numerous challenges to the ongoing implementation. Dr. Klassen has already referred to a number of those, but the focus we must keep our focus on exploiting the opportunities that are in the regulation to achieve meaningful benefits. And in order that the outputs we deliver are effective in terms of realizing the primary objectives of the legislation, it is recognized that there is a need for a continued active engagement with stakeholders. And again, as I did at previous info days, I would like to sincerely thank all those stakeholders that contribute to Cvmp consultations, either by providing written comments or participation in meetings. Your feedback is, again, gratefully appreciated. Next slide, please. Okay, last thing from me, just as to say, basically it's time for me to say goodbye and farewell, but to say, as Dr. Klassen has already advised you, that we have a new Cvmp chair, and that is Dr. Scheffele. And Dr. Scheffele is someone that will be known to many of you. Dr. Scheffele, his origins are the Medicines Evaluation Board here in the Netherlands. He is a toxicologist and a risk assessor. That's his area of expertise, but he's a long-standing, long-serving member of the Cvmp and various working groups that support the Cvmp. And he has been my Cvmp vice chair for the last 3 years and has provided me with invaluable support. So I'm not so sure about how people would view my 6 years as Cvmp chair, but I have full confidence that Dr. Scheffele will be an excellent chair for his 3-year mandate. So I wish him every success and Cvmp every success over the coming years. So thank you from me.
Thank you very much, David, for this update on what Cvmp has doing and is planning to do for the rest of the year. All of you who have looked at the agenda will see that now that we've dumped a lot of information on you from the side of the Commission and from the side of the agency and its scientific committee, we now go for a coffee break before we hope to hear from the industry and this afternoon from Kat Sterling on how you have experienced the, well, just above 100 days of living with the VMP regulation in force. And but before we go on the coffee break, which will last until 4 o'clock exactly, I would like to make a brief correction to one of the slides that Ivo showed in his presentation. We forgot to mention 2 additional delegates from industry to the Veterinary IT Systems Improvement Advisory Group. And very importantly, because one of the two members will present tomorrow, so it's Sonja Schwab and Jaka Petric, both from Access MedVet, and apologies for the oversight, but here you have the correct composition of this group, which will advise the agency going forward on how to develop the IT systems that both the industry and the competent authorities will rely on in the years to come. And with that, I would like to break for coffee now. We will all, I expect you back online in the room at 4 o'clock, 1600 hours, and please enjoy the break, the coffee, or whatever you may wish to enjoy, and talk to you at 4 o'clock. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's just past 4 o'clock, and I would like to restart this first session of the EMA Veterinary Info Day 2022. As I mentioned before the break, now is the opportunity where we're going to hear from our key stakeholders in the whole implementation of the veterinary medicines regulation, the industry perspective. And it's really just coming up a few days over 100 days of the regulation in place. And I think that gives us a good experience of what is working, what isn't working, what should be working better, and where do we have still a lot of work ahead of us. But before I give the floor to Kat Sterling, I would also like to add my thanks to those of Eva, Ivo, and David. Without our stakeholders and their considered feedback throughout the past years, we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are today. And so many, many thanks to you for your consistent and supportive input over the years. And I trust we can continue in this vein going forward to make sure that we get the best out of the regulation. With that, I would like to hand the floor to Katrina Sterling. She graduated from the University of Edinburgh with a degree in virology before doing a PhD in veterinary immunology at the Pirbright Institute, and she then spent 4 years as a postdoc at Pirbright working on DNA vaccines before she joined the UK Veterinary Medicines Directorate. And after 2 years at the regulator, she decided that industry is perhaps the more interesting place to be, definitely at the forefront of developments. And she has since been working for Pfizer Animal Health, now Zoetis, where she's currently the Director of Regulatory Affairs, focusing on companion animal vaccines and biologicals. So Katrina, please go ahead. I look forward to your presentation and see how we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Can you guys hear me okay? Fantastic. And hopefully you guys can all see the slides because I've got control of these. So any problem, please let me know, but hopefully the technology will work. And first of all, a huge thank you to Ivo, to David, and to Eva for the information they shared with us earlier, and obviously from industry, a big thank you to David for his time as Cvmp chair, and we very much look forward to working with Johan going forward. So I'm going to give you a view from industry, or at least from Animal Health Europe, on the first sort of 100 days. What's been good, what's been a challenge, and where we think going forward we've still got a lot of work to do. And thank you very much from an industry point of view for the chance to do this. So I'm going to cover some first feedback post-implementation. I'm going to touch on the Article 152 QRD9 updates, which is a major challenge for industry, the road to compliance, some key points for product availability, and our priorities looking forward. So first, feedback post-implementation. And I think, as probably everybody's hopefully realised from the talks you've had already, there's been enormous achievements within the transition period before we launched the new regulation, and since January when we've been fully in swing with it. It's been a huge transition for everybody and a huge change. And as we all know, change is always a challenge for everybody. And we're definitely heading in the right direction. Checking with our colleagues recently, it was good to know that we had now got to the point where we'd submitted more Vnras than we had open IT tickets. So that was progress in the right direction, as you've all heard. We have challenges with the UPD, but working together, we're moving in the right direction. And the increased communication from the EMA and CMDV, including all the stakeholder interactions, demonstrations of training and trainings, have been a huge help to us all. And we still have a lot of learning to do. And as a lot of people have said, we're very much still in this bedding in phase of learning to work within this new regulation and the new systems we have. And we all still have a long way to go to really be able to achieve the full benefits, because it always takes a long time to get used to new systems. And I think, as everybody's heard, there are still some bugs and some fixes and improvements that are needed. The high admin burden during this bedding in period has been a challenge. A lot of increased resource requirements, and it's not really clear yet whether or not the regulation will deliver on the target to reduce admin burden. Just to give you an example right now of the challenges with this, with the UPD, when I asked my colleagues just an example of this, we had a VNRA, so variation not requiring assessment, licensed in 7 countries nationally. Previously, it would have taken us maybe 10 minutes to submit via CESP. Took a whole afternoon last week to do that. And that was just with being able to do that and all the extra admin that's going with learning the UPD and the way it's working right now. So right now we have a massive increase in admin burden. And it's not yet clear in the long run, as the systems improve, we get used to them and we get past the minimum viable product into where we'd like to be, whether or not there will still be an increase or whether that will reduce back down to a post regulation level, or whether there'll still be an increase. And we're a long way yet from understanding that. But it's very clear that all parties are doing the best to manage the current situation with a very, I'll call it, immature and not yet fully functional databases. So I think we've already heard, touching on this, that the UPD data set is still not complete, and that is an issue. There's also challenges with regard to the quality of the data, so errors, inconsistencies, etc. Pharmacovigilance, we're learning by doing, and you'll hear a lot more about that tomorrow, so I won't go into pharmacovigilance in detail. And not all the database functionalities required to run the VMR regulatory business processes are fully available yet. Ivo touched on that earlier. So we've still got a little way to go with some of the IT systems. On a positive side, there's been a huge amount of work on guidelines, reflection papers, concept papers, implementing delegating acts, etc. We were tallying them up internally with Animal Health Europe. We've provided comments on 52 documents from Cvmp, CTV and the Commission, and that just reflects the huge amount of work coming through from the NCAs and the EMA and the Commission in preparing all of the supporting documents that go with this new regulation. And it's very highly appreciated by industry, the chance to comment, and also the feedback we get when our comments are either accepted or not accepted. It helps us understand where the regulators are at. There are still many key guidelines to come, and David gave you a good summary of a lot of those. And it will be important that we work with the EMA, Cvmp and the NCAs on those, because it's absolutely critical to get that additional guidance for the aims of the regulation to be achieved. In terms of the Article 52 QRD9 updates, so Eva touched on this from a regulatory legislative point of view, so I won't go into the detail of Article 152. As Eva explained, that's now being resolved. The important thing for industry here is that now gives us the 5 years transition period to update the QRD9 text. So that's the SPC and labelling text in line with the new template to comply with the new regulation. And this is a huge task for us all. It's a big admin burden to do this for the next 5 years. And we're really looking for a flexible and pragmatic approach from both sides to ensure that it doesn't result in requests for additional data or additional complexity. And we were very pleased to see from the CMDV the confirmation that from a CMDV point of view, there's no expectation for additional data. And that's important because this is, it should be an administrative exercise to do these updates, although we understand there's a huge amount of change, so we expect these to take some time for us all to get used to, and it will be a lot of work for everybody. The option to extend implementation time for revised artwork will help ensure medicine availability and management of costs. It's a big transition. It means changing just about every single piece of artwork for every single product we have on the market in Europe. And the option to include the Article 107.3 revisions of the prophylaxis claims as part of QRD updates and not a separate variation requiring assessment would help reduce the admin burden and be a positive for industry. With respect to telematics, so Union Product Database, we've heard a bit about this already, and it's very clear that flexibility is needed due to the product data gaps or data inconsistencies and errors. And Ivo touched on this. One of the challenges we have is that all of the national information for all the national legacy products is not yet in there, although everybody is moving in the right direction. And once all that information's in there, and as we start to work with the UPD, we will start to get a full handle on how correct that information is. The 30-day deadline for VNRAs is only possible if products are fully visible in the UPD, and that includes either national-only products or all of the RMS and CMS information if we're talking about MRP and DCP products. There is a potential business impact if changes are delayed. And the guidance from Animal Health Europe is that companies should not delay making changes that require a VNA if they qualify as a VNRA. But where they cannot update the UPD, they should notify the RMS or the competent authority by email of explaining why they can't do it, where the gaps are, where the information is. And hopefully in most cases, the NCAs will then be able to prioritize getting the information in there to allow that VNRA to go forward. And if not, that we would notify by email, and then we would update the UPD when that is possible. We acknowledge that there are some challenges with certain NCAs with the legacy information, and it's something that we all just need to work together to try and maintain compliance. From a pharmacovigilance point of view, I'm not going to go into detail. This will be covered tomorrow morning. But again, it's a need for flexibility, particularly during year 1 and beyond when it comes to PV inspections. Everybody is very much learning as we go. David touched on signal detection. That's new for everybody. And then also all the processes and systems that go with it. It means a big change, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about it tomorrow. One of the positive steps is the JIG group being reconvened because it allows that important dialogue between industry and the EMA and the NCAs. And that's, I think that for pharmacovigilance, that will be one of the most important things as we continue to work through this. In terms of availability, it's one of the key pillars of the new regulation, and David touched on that when he was talking about various guidelines that are linked to this. Limited markets. So David gave you a summary of the number of applications the Cvmp have seen so far, and from the industry side, we would say that the guidance documents are a key first step. And early experience with the classification process is positive, and it's useful to hear back from David the reasons why some of these things that have been confirmed as limited market have not been seen as qualifying for Article 23. And that sort of feedback is important for industry for the future to know what kind of information or what kind of areas would lead to qualifying as limited market, and then obviously Article 23. It's a little bit too early to tell what the impact this will have on availability yet. And David touched on this briefly. An important next step is that the need for this MOM style policy or guidance for products that are minor species, so they meet limited market, but they're not classified as limited market according to Article 23. So they don't qualify for the data reductions. So that guidance will be very, very important, because we are aware that there, as David already showed you, there will be multiple products that will qualify as limited market, but not for the Article 23 data reductions. And that kind of MUM style policy or guidance that helps us manage these products through the full requirements, or the almost full requirements of Annex 2 will be really important, and that would include the ability for extrapolation of MRLs, which is particularly important for minor species. And the other point to this is the mum style guidance, or this being covered around quality aspects, because as we all know, the limited market Article 23 reductions do not give any formal reductions for quality requirements. And actually, especially for immunologicals, that flexibility in quality requirements under the previous mums policy was a key component of the value of that procedure. In terms of emerging threats to availability, a lot of these I'm going to show you now are actually less scientific based and more practicalities coming from differences we're seeing. So one of the things that's come up quite a lot is the requests for national and different ID requirements, so EAN codes or QR codes. And we very much request a harmonized approach for a European ID code. This is foreseen in the new regulation. Under Article 17.1, there is a shall, when appropriate, clause that would allow development of harmonized rules, and we would very much suggest that this is something that is now coming up as being something that is necessary, because it has an impact on joint labeling and costs and our ability to have combined packs. We've seen, for example, the Netherlands ask for EAN barcodes on labels, Belgium national codes, Poland again the EAN codes, and Italy data matrix codes. So this is just a request from industry that this is another area that I think it will be useful the Commission to look at in collaboration with the EMA and the NCAs. Emerging threats, main points are on availability, innovation, and admin burden, which is very much a joint issue. We have some challenges with regards to the GDP side of things and the wholesaler licenses. We've seen examples of where, despite being valid through the union, wholesalers are not being able to supply across retailers established in other member states. And we also have some challenges around inconsistencies between member states in issuing virtual wholesaler distribution authorizations. So the legislation is relatively clear that you need these WDAs regardless of whether you're physically handling product or just financial transactions. And we're seeing some inconsistencies there in terms of, so we need a common position to facilitate that GDP to allow the flow of medicines. We're also seeing challenges with double reporting requirements between the EU and national databases. So the UPD is meant to be the sole source of information, but we're still seeing in certain situations national competent authorities asking for sales and availability data. And it's not clear how much of that is national legal requirements versus still some challenges with their level of comfort with the UPD and the information in there. The cost of variations always comes up as a challenge. There's still a feeling it's disproportionate in some cases. So as everybody will be aware, and Emily may touch on tomorrow, the system for variations requiring assessment is now clear, and we have the option for reduced and extended timetables. And industry would very much encourage the consideration of reduced fees for reduced timetables, more akin to what we'd have previously under the 1B variations, and also a reduced fee for the revision of the QRD template information when it is just that variation alone. And we very much appreciate what we've heard from EMAs, the consideration of a reduced fee for pharmaceutical products, because there's a big difference in terms of the fees for a variation for a pharmaceutical product versus an immunological product. And also the issue of divergent national legislation and requirements, which can have an impact on some of the centralized products. And coming on to that divergent national legislation, we really need to think about how we can avoid this disharmonization and where EMA can help. Maintaining harmonization is a really important part of the regulation, especially where it does foresee some local decisions by individual member states. I've given you the ID code example already. Another area is electronic leaflets, which from an industry point of view is a very positive move forward, that that's now legally allowed in the new legislation, and it's something for the future we'd very much like to see further discussion on, because it will allow us easier and faster implementation of changes in leaflets. And there are many benefits from a sustainability point of view also in having electronic leaflets. Local representatives, which have to now go on all of the centralized labeling, we have some challenges there regarding their establishment. And the other point here, which was also touched on at the Heads of Medicines Agency meeting a couple of last week even, is the Plastic Packaging and Waste Directive and how that links into labelling and packaging. So that's something that may be at top of everybody's radar, but the most recent changes to that brought veterinary medicines into scope of some of that in certain countries. And it's now up for revision again with a proposal to convert it to a regulation. And it's very important for industry that the EMA is able to engage with the European Commission on the impact of that revision and the potential impact on medicines, as some of that packaging and waste directive requires labelling on products, which is not necessarily consistent with the requirements of the regulation 2019-6, which specifies what can and can't appear on product labels. Transparency, communication, and access to information are absolutely key for industry. One example is in relation to GMP and GDP. So Eva touched on it, that they've worked together to produce us further guidance on Article 94, which is very positive. That helps certainly from a GMP point of view. We still have some challenges around understanding and expectations specifically to GDP, and especially for biological active substances. I think from an industry point of view, the requirements for pharmaceutical active substances are clear, but there's a little bit more lack of understanding of when a risk-based GMP inspection of an active substance site would happen. So clearly the legal basis is set down in the guidance that Eva was referring to, but we're not completely clear what the basis for that risk assessment will be. And also around the Article 95 requirements for API registrations. So the legislation talks about active substances only and makes no distinction between pharmaceutical or biological active substances. And the particular concern is specific to immunological biological active substances, so vaccine antigens, especially where there's a lack of clarity around whether in certain member states they are considered as medicinal products versus active substances. And it's something Animal Health Europe have reached out to the Inspectors Working Party to seek some clarification on, as we still have a little bit of lack of understanding of exactly what's expected in that area. And the diverging labelling and packaging requirements driven by local regulation, that links back to my earlier point about the plastic packaging and waste directives. We're seeing requests linked to that right now for labelling on products around the nature of material in plastic, which can have an impact. And it's really critical for national products, but it can also impact the centralised product and its products. And it's really important that that transparency and communication, where some of that linked legislation can have an impact on products. Our priorities looking forward. Our top priority really is to finish the data upload and data cleanup in the UPD and to fix the first use issues and bugs, and then to move on with the improvements. Reducing the admin burden. The focus now is on delivering this objective, and it's very much a shared objective. We need to continue to work together to achieve this. Our current experience shows the need for this needs to be kept in mind when implementing new rules and processes for the benefit of all, because small details can have a major impact on the teams doing the work and the admin burden. As an example, we know in the future we will have to add the product identifier codes to the file names for the translations that need to be uploaded into the UPD. And adding those product identifier codes to the file names is a lot of extra admin burden for us in doing that. So it's a small thing that is there to facilitate the upload of the information, but it adds a lot of admin burden. Identifying the priorities for functional improvements of the UPD, and Ivo gave you the introduction to the VSIAG group, which is great because I don't have to explain to you what it is. So Ivo's told you what that is, and you've seen that there are industry representatives on there, and that will be a key route for engagement going forward in terms of the improvements that are needed to the IT systems. And very much a look for flexibility during this first year and probably also beyond, because I think we while this is a bedding in and getting used to it year, we do expect that it will take more than a year until we're really to the point where this has become a routine system that is all working the way we all expect it to. And the need to be able to adapt business processes for everybody, for the EMA, the NCAs, and for MAHs during this time. We all need to work with it and work together to be flexible, to get through, and to understand what improvements are needed to really deliver on the legislation. Our key priorities and guidance looking forward: the revised benefit risk guideline. It's got tied to very many aspects of the legislation, and David did touch on it, that we're not expecting to see that one too soon, but it is a very important one for industry. The reflection paper on the criteria for the application of Article 45, including the issue of protection of technical data for new species added to established products, and David touched on that one, so we'll be looking out for the next steps with that soon. Clarification of protection of technical data for new indications, particularly in the global MA context, and also the revision and update of the notice to applicants to align with the new regulation and associated guidelines. That's in definite need of an update to support marketing authorization holders and applicants in the future. And also, although we've not gone into this in any detail here, understanding the status of the dose optimization project and the relationship to the process of SPC harmonization. That's something being driven through CMDV in terms of SPC harmonization, but the dose optimization part of it is something that will be important for certain products that need to go through harmonization. And again, just to come back to that need for continued dialogue and communication as we all navigate the new regulatory environment. And we can only say to the EMA and to everybody online that it's been positive so far. We very much appreciate your engagement with us on this, and engaging with us where at all possible. And finally, just to touch on the last point from an agile governance point of view. So there's a potential impact of the agile network portfolio IT environment on the veterinary regulatory environment. This is something with governance and environment is adapted to the human sector structure needs. Human and vet sectors will use the same platform, but with a different configuration. And we understand the vet sector is represented in the different or dedicated bodies. And we just encourage, from a vet sector point of view, the continued collaboration to ensure that the vet voice is heard and the vet sector needs and constraints are accommodated, particularly around limited resources and different legislative drivers. And I think hopefully that's just about on time, Barbara, because that's the last slide I had. And we'll finish with just a big thank you to everybody. And sorry, I'll get rid of things that are coming up on my screen.
Thank you, Kat. That's perfectly on time. And I think we now heard from really the different parties that collaborated to get us to where we were now. And even as you say, and as Ivo mentioned, not everything is quite in place, and not everything is working perfectly yet. We have made enormous progress. I'm sure that the presentations will have answered some questions. We've had some written questions throughout the afternoon, but now is really the opportunity for you to ask the presenters or the panel relevant questions related to the implementation of Regulation 2019-6 and to what you've heard today. In order for us to give you the floor, because the attendees at this meeting are muted and need to be physically unmuted from our side, I invite you to raise your hand. I see 2 names on the list so far, and my colleagues behind me will unmute you in the order in which you appear on this list. And the first question, or the first hand up that I see, is from Maria Saida Romeo. And you have not yet been unmuted, but you have been unmuted now. And I invite you to ask you the question, Maria.
Sorry, I haven't got a question.
Oh, okay. Then perhaps you raised your hand by mistake.
Sorry, it's a mistake. Sorry.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
Else, I hope that's not the case for you. The next question then would come from Else Goossens.
Sorry, I made a mistake also. Sorry. Hi, everybody.
Hi. Okay. Then there don't seem to be any additional questions to what was put in the chat. And I think there was one question in the chat where we would need to hear back from Eva. But before I read out the question for you and let you respond, I would like to say all the participants today really have emphasized that we got to where we are in a spirit of collaboration. So we all work together to implement the requirements of the regulation. At one point in time in the future, maybe there is a need for stronger measures. And the question, if I can find it again, the question was really whether there were any plans in place to, sorry, can't find it. Give me a moment. To whether there are any sanctions or penalties planned for authorities that do not work with the UPD as it should be done. And again, I would like to say usually cooperation gets us much farther than sanctions or penalties. But Eva, I would be grateful if you could give us your thoughts.
Well, many thanks for the question. And well, I think that it is too early to start speaking about sanctions to those member states who have not yet fully implemented their obligations. The regulation is in place, for some few months only. I think that to put in place the UPD has been a major challenge to everyone, that a lot has been achieved, that, as just said, it is still immature and not fully functional, but we do already have a very good database in place. I'm conscious that member states are doing their best in order to upload all the data, but it is true that we have limited resources, that there were some IT issues, and that I think that everyone is doing the very best in order to have everything in place. So I think that we need to be a bit patient. In the middle of the road, we have found some unexpected difficulties, and I mentioned Article 152 and the transitional rules. So I do think that, we have been we are doing the best that we can to put everything in place. It is a major achievement. I think that the period of time that we were given for the implementation of so many new provisions and development of different IT systems, it was rather short, because indeed it was only 3 years, and this has required, to start from zero on many areas. So while as for every piece of the legislation, in case of failure by the member states to put in place something required by law, the Commission has the capacity to go for an infringement procedure. But I don't think it's the right time to start so in such a hard way, when the system is not yet fully developed and when we need to give us some time. Then, having said that, there are many things that have to be improved, including in some cases the legislation. And as you know, this is just the starting point. The previous speaker has just mentioned the need to develop the provisions for the identification code. So, in my presentation, it was not identified as one of the priorities. But in the Commission, we are taking good notes, and for us, it's very important to understand that even when the co-legislators have not given this legal deadline for adoption, but we do still take notes, and if possible, we can consider to speed up as much as we can if we do have the necessary resources. I do hope that I was able to reply to this question. Not sure if there are other questions. From me, there was something in relation to Article 23, I think, but I'm not sure if it was responded in the chat, Barbara, to.
Give me a moment, I will check. I think most of the questions related to Article 23 were responded in the chat. There was a question on whether antimicrobials were eligible for Article 23, but I believe that Jordi took that one. Katrina, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just first of all, to respond to Eva, and then yeah, we would very much appreciate if the Commission were able to look at the rules on the ID codes. It's something that hadn't really been on our radar, but as we've started to see more and more requests for it, it's something that's becoming clearer that there is a need for that harmonization. So that common legislation on that would be helpful. Now, I actually had a question, Barbara. A
Go
question
ahead.
for David. So I mentioned in my presentation the importance for industry of the benefit risk guideline, and David didn't say too much about it in his presentation, but I did note the date for completion of that now seems to be the end of 2023, which is quite a long way out. I just wondered whether David could maybe comment a little bit more on where the Cvmp are with that guideline, and why it's taking so long, considering for industry that's a really critical one in terms of our understanding, particularly for availability and that sort of thing for product development going forward.
David.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Kat, for the question. To be honest, I can't add a huge amount more to what has already been stated in terms of update. The concept paper on the revision to the recommendation, that's been published for consultation. Comments in the consultation have been received, and the expert working group will consider those comments. But in terms of sort of the activity itself, and in terms of addressing the various aspects of the risk benefit that stakeholders, industry in particular, would like to see addressed, it was considered to be a larger task than a sort of a basic revision. So there will be a need to look at some sort of fundamental aspects of the guideline itself, and it was felt that it was something that couldn't be rushed and would, as I said, take a bit of time, and that's why a sort of a deadline for finalization of the guideline has been set at, if I remember correctly, December 23. So, as I say, in order to have the consideration to address the points that have been raised by stakeholders, it's just felt that more time is needed in that respect. So, that's about as much as I can say at the moment, Kat. In terms of the scope of the work, it was sort of detailed in the concept paper itself, and as I say, it's sort of more than just a basic review. So I'm not sure that that's terribly helpful, but that's as much as I can say just at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Katrina, does that help?
It helps to understand a little bit more, and I guess it's something that in the future as Cvmp work through it, if there's a need for further engagement with industry on that as they work through what we'd like to see in it, I think it may be something that might present a good opportunity for a stakeholder forum or something to further discuss it, if that would help the Cvmp move forward with it. It's obviously something that's of big interest to industry, but I think we do understand the challenges with it in concern that I've raised it as an important point, and I think it's certainly good that the Cvmp will take the time to consider the comments on where that paper needs to be. And I think we probably would agree that it can, in the context of the new regulation, that it probably is the right time for a rethink of that rather than just simply a simple revision.
Okay, thank you very much for the feedback, and we'll bear that in mind going forward. Eva, if I may come back to you, there was one little question, I think that was mostly directed to you. When you explained the additional time to adapt the product information to the requirements of the new legislation, there was a question in that chat how that would apply to veterinarians, and whether veterinarians would be able to sell or have products on hand with old style product information beyond 28th of January 2027. I'm not sure if you have a response to that.
I'm not sure in any case if I understand the question, but I mean, the transitional period which is given is only for 5 years. And then, I mean, it cannot be extended longer. The proposal of the regulation presented by the Commission is quite exceptional procedure to do things. We are not amending the regulation, and to have this regulation in place, it could be a record time. So products which are not in compliance with the regulation cannot be placed on the market after that date.
Barbara, maybe just, I think the question is about what it would mean for the vet. So as Eva said, the industry cannot place product on the market after that date if it's not in compliance with the regulation.
Correct.
But if the product is already in the market, then it can remain in the market because it was placed on the market before the deadline. So it shouldn't have any impact for veterinarians if they have that product already and it's still in line with the previous requirements.
In any case, yeah, thank you. The huge amount of products going through this process, I think that it is important that everyone start to do their homework as soon as the regulation is in place, which is going to be very soon, because I don't think that we should be confronted to a situation when 1 year before this deadline, everyone start to consider this is going to be a huge work for all of you, for all of us, in a way, and it was already, I think that a major achievement to have this possibility to extend for 5 additional years. So I would like to take this opportunity to invite you to start to consider to bring the provisions in line with the new provisions on packaging and labeling as soon as this is possible.
Thank you very much for that, Eva. And the next question is somewhat related to that, and I will give the floor to Emily Drury in a moment to answer it, but I'd like to read it out for everyone. The QRD 9 variation is classic, and that's the variation one needs to do to adapt the product information to Regulation 2019-6, is classified as a standard variation. Is it going to follow the timetable for a standard variation, or can it be approved in a shorter time, taking into account that it will be more of an administrative variation? And thanks to Emily for taking that one on.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks for the question. Good afternoon, everybody. I won't talk too much about this variation, GI18, because otherwise I won't have anything to entertain you with in my presentation tomorrow morning. But on the point of the timetable, which I think actually I wasn't going to cover, it was, so in the joint CMDV EMA classification guidance for variations requiring assessment, this particular variation was allocated the standard timetable, so that's the 60-day timetable. And the reason for that was it is And especially for our centralized products informations, where we can have product information which goes into over 100 pages fairly easily, it is quite a task to carry out the review, even if some parts of that review can be considered administrative. So it's and there is then also a good opportunity to ask questions during that procedure. There are parts of the template, for example, the pharmacovigilance part, where we know there can be a bit of dialogue. So it's felt that that timetable is appropriate. But that's not to say the article which lays down the timelines for variations requiring assessment says within 60 days. If there were no questions, there would be no obstacle to us closing the procedure without a list of questions, for example. So there would be that flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for the clarification. People are a bit shy in sticking up their hands, but I do have two more written questions, and both of them would go to Eva. The first one is regarding the feasibility study on monographs for ERA reviews. The report was published in November 2021, and the question is, what are are there any actions from the Commission to the European Parliament planned? Eva, the floor is yours.
Yeah, no, many thanks for the question. So as it was said, the study is published, and due to the priority allocated to the finalization of the legal acts, we were not in a position to be drafting the report to the Parliament and to the Council, and we do hope to be in a position to start working on it after the summer break. So before, most likely, we would like to have some exchange of views with different actors, and then the Commission will proceed with the preparation of the report. But again, this is mostly linked, to the available resources here, and I do hope not to have more unexpected problems and last-second crises, as it has been the case last year, for example, with the packaging and labeling. So we are conscious that we are late, and we will do our best to start working on it.
Thank you very much for that, Eva. And the next question goes to you as well. And it was Rick Clayton asking whether the NTA, whether there are plans to update the NTA.
Well, thank you for the question. So as I said during the presentation, we are well aware that this is a valuable tool by the network and stakeholders. This is not in the new regulation. The notice to applicants are not mentioned, and we are willing to see how to continue to communicate the key aspects. So we are discussing this with the agency and with the network, and hopefully we will find a way to keep with a different name, perhaps. So we will see what would be the best way to keep this information available, and of course involving the network. So we are working on it. Today I cannot give you any reply, but I do expect to be in a position at next occasions to communicate and to give you more info on this and on many other issues.
Thank you very much for that, Eva. And Eva would like to add to your response. Thank you.
Sorry, Eva, because for not having discussed this with you as well, but I think the need for the NTA has been identified also from the side of the regulators, not only from the industry. And certainly, I would like to inform participants in this meeting that discussions are ongoing, either on updating the NTA, which we all know is not in the regulation. So potentially that would be done in a different way as it has been executed in the past, and introducing the new elements in there and deleting the elements that are no longer relevant in in a process that will develop, I think, over the coming time. There's a lot of in the notice to applicants that still remains to be clarified, how things will run, how business will run. But we do all believe it's a very valuable document. CMDV has been asking us also to be involved, and it will be discussed in the next task force meeting between agency, commission, and the member states, and to see if we can come up with an approach or a timeline to start working on this. But I do know that currently it is under the responsibility of the Commission, so we're looking into a solution.
Thank you very much for that. It looks like the participants have run out of questions. I don't see any new questions in the chat, and I also don't see any hands raised. Are you sure you have no additional questions to any of the participants today? I'll give you a few moments to think of something. Are there any questions from the panelists to the other panelists? Rick, thank you very much for that comment. Rick's saving all his questions for Emily tomorrow. So Emily will have a really good night's sleep, worrying about what might come tomorrow.
I'm just going to make my excuses and
Exactly. We'll definitely deal with that tomorrow then. But if there are no more questions to today's panel participants, I would really like to thank you all for the updates. Katrina put some numbers behind it. It's a huge amount of work that has been delivered already. And we will keep going strong to make sure that the remainder of the questions are being addressed. And keep in mind the feedback received in particular from the industry and what goes well, what doesn't go well, and what the impact of small changes might be. So we will keep an eye on that. And thank you for the feedback received. For everyone who's connected today and wishes to participate tomorrow, please bear in mind that in the confirmation email that you received, there was a separate link for tomorrow's meeting. You cannot use the same link as today's link to join the meeting tomorrow. Please check your emails, and if you do not find the emails in your inbox, it might have ended up in the spam, but you will have to use a different link to connect to tomorrow's meeting. I would like to thank you for your availability and your participation. And in case you haven't seen, we will be starting half an hour earlier tomorrow. So the meeting tomorrow will start at 9 o'clock. So thank you to everyone who participated today. Thank you for the information and hope to see you all again tomorrow.